some lessons don't come from books. They come from bruises. They come from life.
There is no substitute for experience, period.
Some of the biggest successes were a byproduct of failure.
If you want to learn, build, and grow,
Why not learn from somebody who's already paid the price for success?
the wisdom is in the gray.
This is the Greybeard Show.
Greybeard Show. Learn,
Build.
grow.
And welcome to the show. This is the Greybeard Show, hosted by yours truly. My name is Shawn Davis. But in case you didn't know, just in case it wasn't clear, just in case you didn't quite hear, I go by Greybeard, and you're along with me as I'm talking about personal growth. I'm talking about self-improvement. I'm talking about becoming a better version of yourself. I'm talking about building a community. I'm talking about, just living by design, living on purpose. And today's show is specifically geared toward high achievers out there, maybe some CEOs, maybe some C-suite executives, maybe some successful entrepreneurs. But what I'm going to be talking about today is something of personal experience that I've gone through. And unfortunately, I didn't use the services of a mentor much as I developed my career. Little background on me: 22-year former fiduciary financial advisor. I helped about 400 families manage their life savings toward retirement, college education funding, etc. So from an investment, financial services perspective, planning perspective, got that stuff down, spent 22 years in that particular business, sold that in 2017. My wife and my 4 boys thought we were going to be the California version of Chip and Joanna Gaines. We started flipping houses. I flipped 12 high-end homes, had some great success in flipping, but did not love that. Transitioned, during COVID into coaching, mentoring other successful business owners, etc., because I had some experience in that regard. Opened up an adventure van business, ended up falling into an opportunity in solar. So you can kind of say I'm a bit of a Renaissance man, but I'm also a recovering narcissist. So I'm trying not to toot my own horn. I'm not saying this stuff to be braggadocious. I'm just saying it for context so you can understand who's giving you this advice. What kind of background, what kind of experience, what kind of, history do I have that I think I have something to share with the public? And I have had the good fortune through many, many challenges and many, many failures to have some success. I have built 3 different separate, unique businesses that have had 7-figure revenue. Financial services, I've had that in flipping houses, and then I own an energy company today that does solar throughout California. So that's a little bit about me. But here, today's show about these blind spots of successful entrepreneurs. This is going to be a checklist of shadows. Do you have any of these shadows? Do you have any of these blind spots in your life? If you do, you're definitely going to want to pay attention to this show, because I'm going to talk about how to overcome these, what they look like, what these blind spots are, because again, by nature of the fact that it's a blind spot, you're probably not aware of it, right? So hold yourself in, strap yourself in. This may be a little bit like drinking from a fire hose to some degree, but I think it's going to be great information for you. So let's talk about the blind spots of successful entrepreneurs. Shadow number 1, here's a checklist. Shadow number 1, the mask of the maker. Okay. Here's what it means. You've built something impressive in business, but somewhere along the way, the business became the mirror you measure your worth by. You wear success like armor, but it's also a bit of a disguise. When the mask slips, you're unsure who's behind it. The entrepreneur and the man have merged into one. Now, from personal experience, I've lived through this, okay? I lost myself. I lost my identity. I lost Shawn in the process of building my business. And financial services, man, it was just a Herculean effort to get that off the ground. Initially, I started in financial services in insurance. And life insurance specifically. And so life insurance for most folks is a lot like cough medicine. Give me as little as it takes to make me better, and that's all they wanted to talk about. And you have to love somebody to want to buy life insurance, because it only matters, often when you're gone. And so very difficult sale, very challenging business environment. For the first 9 years of my financial services career, it was just feast or famine, very cyclical. My commissions and my income was much like a sound wave that you see undulating. I'd have good months, I'd have bad months, I'd You go 2-3 months without making any money and then have a monster month just because something hit, something came through, etc. And so because of that toil, because of that sweat, because of those tears, because of that Herculean effort, I wanted this thing to be I wanted to build something of value. I wanted it to be significant. I wanted to be quote unquote successful, right? And that really came for me in 2009 when I first started to use radio marketing to market for financial services. It was the first time I'd ever seen anything kind of open up a spigot of opportunity, of leads, of people that were interested in speaking with me. And you got to strike while the iron's hot. You got to reap what you sow. And if it's reaping season, I had never seen this. I'd never seen something generate that type of response and curiosity and interest in what I was doing. And so I just hammered down, man. So you fast forward to 2013, 2014, and I don't say this to be braggadocious at all. I just want to give you context. 2013, 2014, by that time I was spending about $600,000 a year on radio. That's what it had done to my business. It had just skyrocketed the business. Now we had revenue to justify that, but that was significant as an expense and significant revenue that we were generating at the time. And so I'd created a bit of a monster. Okay. Now, because I had not had success that way previously, I wanted to stretch it out as long as I could. And really for about 4 or 5 years, almost 7 days a week was my work life. And I lost me in that process. I lost my identity as a father, as a husband, as a faith leader, as a friend. So my key philosophy when I coach folks is I always kind of have a barometer of how much have you lost yourself by kind of tying into 7 key areas of life: faith, family, fitness, friends, fun, field, finances. So faith, family, fun, friends, field, finances. Those 7 key areas of life, you want to make sure you're paying attention to, because for me, I was successful in business, but my weight had ballooned up 40 pounds. I was 40 pounds heavier than when I wasn't writing a lot of business and financial services. Friends, I had neglected because I was too busy. Family, I had neglected because I was often too busy. I was physically present often, but mentally absent completely. And there's probably somebody riding around with you right now in a car. If you're listening to this, if you've got somebody that loves you in your house and you're susceptible to this, or this speaks truth to you, they're going to nod their head and go, yep, that's you. That was me. In these other key dimensions of my life, I was absent because I'd focused all of my attention on business. I'd become melded into one. The business was me, and it was my primary focus. And that is a blind spot. That's a weakness. That can cost you everything, okay? For some of you, it can show up this way. You can't enjoy downtime without guilt. Rest feels like a weakness to you. You don't allow yourself rest because that's weakness. You got to keep hustling. You got to stay in the game, right? Or maybe it's you respond to compliments about your character, about who you are as a person, by telling people stories about your business. You can't separate the person from the business. Or here's an example. When things slow down, in those quiet moments, anxiety creeps in because silence exposes how fragile your peace really is. I didn't have peace in those quiet moments. Quiet was not what I wanted. I wanted action, right? And so here's the truth. You don't need to destroy the mask. You need to take it off sometimes. You need to balance being a person with the business. The business wasn't meant to be the business was meant to be a tool of expression, not where you find your identity, not an identity cage. And here's the one thing I'll leave you with. The man matters more than the machine he built. I lost sight of that. Okay. I lost sight of who I was. And maybe that's happening to you. If your worth disappears when your work does, that's a sign that you're not free. You're fused. You're captive. The business is you. Or think about it this way. The company should serve the man, not consume the man. It had consumed me, and I'm glad I fought my way out of it, right? And so if you're listening right now, if this is speaking any type of truth to you, if it resonates with you, I am a self-improvement expert. I help people become better versions of themselves strategically. And if you'd like to connect with me, if you'd like to explore possibly working with me as a self-improvement expert, as a mentor, then all you need to do is take out your smartphone right now and text Greybeard, Greybeard, Greybeard to 84503. It's a 5-digit number, 84503. Just text Greybeard to 84503. My team will reach out, ask you a few questions, get a little bit of an understanding of where you are, what you're doing, what's going on in your life right now. And if the stars align, I'm selective on who I work with, but if the stars align and we get the chance to converse, I would love to learn more about what's going on in your life. Maybe I can help. So text Greybeard, Greybeard, one word, Greybeard to 84503. So let's get into checklist of shadows number 2. So we're talking about blind spots of successful entrepreneurs. We just closed out the Mask of the Maker. Let me talk about the gospel of your own genius. I was particularly susceptible to this one. Because, you see, success can bring confidence, right? And confidence can manifest into arrogance. The moment you start believing your own press, you stop growing. You build walls of certainty around ideas that once made you humble. The blind spot whispers, I already know. I know how to do this. I can handle it. It's kind of like the kiss of the golden thumb, right? Like everything you touch turns to gold, the Midas touch, right? So that's a weakness. It doesn't always work that way. So here's how it shows up, the gospel of your own genius, okay? You stop seeking feedback from others because you assume others can't see what you see. You think you're special and you stop taking feedback from others. That's a challenge. That's a problem. That's a weakness to your business. You dismiss younger or less experienced voices as naive. You want to seek as much information, as much input as you can. You want to open yourself up. If you want to improve in business, you got to create. You got to evolve. You got to innovate. You got to change things. You can't rest on your laurels. And so if you stop seeking any type of feedback from people that may have some valuable ideas to share, just because somebody's younger or less experienced doesn't mean that they don't have a great idea that you can implement. Here's another example. You treat advice as threat instead of opportunity. If you're feeling like when people give you advice that's somehow a negative, you're deep into the gospel of your own genius, okay? And that's a problem. It really does manifest as a business that's on a slippery slope toward stagnation, okay? The truth is the same brilliance that built your empire can blind you to your evolution of that business. Real wisdom requires unlearning, not just knowing. It requires unlearning. Every season of success requires a new beginner's mind. So this showed up with one of my mentoring clients. He's telling me that he's trying to hire a CFO, COO, eventually to become a CEO. And so he's got somebody that he's grooming internally in his business. And we were talking about an idea that this particular person had shared with him, my client, my mentor. And the initial idea was something that he didn't respond favorably to. It was a negative to him, okay? Because it was not something that he would do. And he had never done that type of a thing before. But what I encouraged him to understand is just because he was the person that brought the business to that point didn't mean he was the best person to equip it for the next level 2, level 3, level 4. In other words, I'll talk about this a little later. What I said to him is that you want to avail yourself of all of the information that you can, because other people may bring an idea, strategy, a thought, a marketing plan, etc., that had never occurred to you. And businesses need to evolve. They need to mature. They need to grow. They need to be different, from year to year and month to month effectively. And so I encouraged him to look for reasons to say yes. If you're grooming somebody up to take over the business, the whole premise is that you don't want to be a micromanager, that you want to step away, that you want to have some free time, that you want them to have some skin in the game. And I encouraged him to look for reasons to say yes versus no. He was trying to create a clone of him, and a clone of him may not be the best way to serve the business moving forward, okay? So remember, the same brilliance that built your empire can blind you to your evolution. Real wisdom requires unlearning, right? So here's yesterday's genius is today's ceiling. Okay. If you can't be taught, here's a great one to think about. If you can't be taught, you're already in decline. You always need to have an open mind. You need to have a student's perspective. Soak up as much information as you can, because the blind spot of the gospel of your own genius, okay, it can ruin you very quickly. Very quickly. So if this is at all making sense, you want to connect, you want to mentor with me, I'm a self-improvement expert. I help people become better versions of themselves. Just reach out, text Greybeard to 84503. I'd love to connect. All you got to do is text my name, Greybeard, Greybeard, one word, to 84503. My team will be in touch, and we'll see if we can't help you not fall prey to the gospel of your own genius. All right, let's move on to blind spot number 3. I call this a checklist of shadows, right? If you're an entrepreneur, if you're a business owner, if you're a C-suite executive, you want to make sure you're not falling prey to blind spots in your business life or personal life. So here's the commander's curse. Interesting subject, right? Commander's curse. Here's what it means. You've earned everything through grit and control, but now control is turned from power into prison, okay? You trust yourself more than your team, so you carry weight meant for 10 men. You call it excellence, but it's actually fear disguised as leadership, okay? Here's how sometimes it can show up. You micromanage talented people until they leave. You feel irritation when others make decisions without your approval. You secretly resent the same workload you refuse to delegate. That's the commander's curse, right? So let's talk about this. Micromanage talented people until they leave, okay? If you're wanting to build something of value, okay, I was once told that if the business is 100% dependent on you, it's not a business. A business has to be something that can survive without you attending to it. It has to be bigger than you. Think Apple, Google, Meta, think about these big companies. Think about any large major company. You want the business to be its own entity. You want it to survive without you present. That's also the way that you can completely disconnect. If you ever want to have any version of like a retirement lifestyle, you need to have a business that serves you, that still works when you're not participating, so that still drives revenue when you're not there. And so if you micromanage talented people, always looking over their shoulder, always second guessing them, always trying to be involved, effectively that number one, it erodes the confidence in their work. It erodes their ability to be self-governing to some degree, because they're always second guessing what you're going to do. And it makes them not feel like they can employ the full capabilities of their knowledge, experience, training, and intellect to help serve the business, because everything has always got to be run through you. Now, if you're always the one approving and or micromanaging people, you can never break free of the business. Okay. And is that really what you want to create? Is that the business you really want to have? Okay. Control can feel safe, but it can suffocate growth. Yours and theirs. The next level of leadership isn't doing more. It's trusting more. It's actually doing less. The most powerful commander eventually learns to release the reins and build captains. Build people that you can trust, that have the autonomy to make decisions for the business, for you. And yes, you're still going to mentor them. You're still going to coach them. You're still going to be there. You got to grow them up before you feel like you can give them the reins of the business. But you'll never be free if you're always the guy that controls everything. Okay. Now I've lived through this myself. I always wanted to control everything, both in flipping houses and in financial services. And I think it was finally until I created my solar business that now really substantially runs outside of me. I do the marketing for it. I do radio shows for it. I do social media for it, but I'm not in the day-to-day of it. I had to learn how to give that up because I wanted freedom. I wanted the ability to do what I'm doing right now, which is mentor, people, to speak into people's lives, to be able to help people on a more significant level. And I couldn't do that if I was always stuck in the day-to-day decisions of the business. So I had to grow up, groom not only my kids, some of their friends. Now this business, SolarWise, my solar company, it effectively runs, with me marketing, but it runs day-to-day without my involvement. And that's exactly what you want to create in business. You want to create something that can exist and live without you. Specifically for retirement purposes, you want to create something that can pay you and benefit you without you having to contribute your time to it. Tim Ferriss wrote a great book called The 4-Hour Workweek, and I love it. And I've read the book, and a desire to do that. And that's about 4 to 6 hours is what I'm spending on the solar business that I have right now. But it took a lot of time, effort, energy, focus, planning, and design, living on purpose, designing the business on purpose, having strategy behind how to have these benchmarks in place before I felt the ability to be able to do that. Okay. So again, you can't be everything. Don't be the micromanager. You have to let go of control. Seek to look at ways that you can say yes, edify others, build them up. That's all part of the process of being an entrepreneur if you want to build something of significant value that isn't always tied to you absolutely being there. Okay. Now, if that makes sense to you, if that was a wisdom nugget that you benefited from, if you'd like to connect with me, I am a self-improvement expert. I help high achievers be better, have more well-rounded lives, become better versions of themselves. I help business owners see their blind spots, weaknesses in what they're doing. I'm a sounding board. I'm a peer. I'm a mirror. I can do all those things. If you'd like to connect, reach out. All you got to do is text Greybeard, one word, my name, GREYBEARD, to 84503. All right. Let me talk about, this is a good one, okay? Blind spots of successful entrepreneurs. We're talking about the checklist of shadows to look for. Make sure you don't have these blind spots. Let's talk about the prison of comfortable success. This is a good one. This is what happened to me. You fought hard to reach this level. Now that you're here, the hunger's gone. You've traded the fire of purpose for the warmth of predictability. Comfort isn't evil, but it is seductive. It convinces you that maintenance is mastery. This is how it shows up. You play not to lose instead of playing to win. You rationalize stagnation by calling it balance. You avoid risks that might make you uncomfortable, even if they make you alive again. So, for me, this is how this manifested. As I mentioned before, the first 9 years of my financial services career were brutal. Okay. First couple of years, man, worst ever. Trying to start a financial services business, sell people insurance, become an investment advisor, all the training and the no's and the cold calling and all that stuff. I mean, it just took a lot of energy to finally get there. And once I did achieve what many would call some worldly success, so as I mentioned before, I've been able to create, 3 different 7-figure revenue businesses, the most lucrative of which was financial services. The best year I ever had, we had, almost $2.5 million in revenue. And it was a great, great year. And I felt like, man, I did it. I arrived. I had found my success. I had finally built something of value. And then I started to scale back a bit because, married to my high school sweetheart, 4 kids. I want to be present. You want to enjoy some of the fruits of success, and as much as I could, I tried to do that. And then I started to notice that as I did back off, I lost a little bit of the edge. I lost a little bit of what I think was some of the magic mix that had fueled some of my success. In other words, like, for example, in radio, instead of, working on new content every week, I tended to start to recycle shows. Maybe I didn't have to burden myself with that obligation as much. And so if it worked once, maybe it'll work twice, maybe it'll work 5 times, maybe it'll work 10 times, I started to take my eye off of the ball to some degree. Now, everybody enjoys and should enjoy benefiting from their success. Okay, I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't. But what I am trying to say is that you need to pay attention to the fact that you don't want to get complacent. Okay, you don't want to get so much to the point that you start to shave off the edge, right? So here's an example. I was watching a show this last evening, and it was where these celebrities go on, and it's almost like a boot camp. The name of the show is escaping me right now, but it was where these celebrities and people that you would understand literally are put through some significant trials. And they had a like an NFL player on there, and this NFL player was really upset about how he had retired. He'd retired 6 years previous, and what he said was he said he got to the point and he regrets how it all went down, but he wasn't playing to win. He was just playing not to lose. Okay. He ended up retiring early, and I think he left some time on the table. I think he left some opportunity, and ever since then, it had eroded his confidence. I think he said the first 6 months were great, and then everything kind of fell apart after that. And for the last 6 years, he had really lost himself. He wasn't confident, didn't feel like he had anything that gave him that same type of vitality, that feeling of being alive, and he was just kind of a shell of himself. In other words, the best way to probably describe it was this was certainly a guy that I was watching that felt like the best years that he had to offer in his life or that he had experienced in his life, I could tell he felt like those were behind him. They weren't ahead of him. You know, he was just lost without football. And I immediately said to my wife, I said, this is a guy I need to coach. This is a guy I need to mentor because I think I could help him. But he lost sight of who he was because his identity was only wrapped up in what he used to do. He was the guy. He was an NFL player. He'd played in the Super Bowl. He was that guy, and he didn't have an identity outside of that. Okay, but what caused all of that to happen was he started playing not to lose instead of playing to win. He started to rationalize backing off and creating more balance in his life. He avoided risks that might make him uncomfortable, but even if it meant that he was alive again. I'm glad he joined the show. I'm glad he went on this show to really challenge himself. But this is an example of the prison of comfortable success. Okay? Comfort slowly dulls the edge that once made you extraordinary. What used to feel like peace is now apathy in disguise. You can't stay on the mountain you climbed. The air gets thin and the view loses meaning, right? So comfort isn't peace. It's the slow leak of purpose. Every man who stops climbing eventually slides down the mountain. And so you always want to aspire to stoke that creative, to find new versions of meaning for yourself in life, whether that's hobbies, avocations, starting a different business, whatever it is, you got to find meaning outside of just the thing that you're doing. And I was susceptible to that, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's a blind spot for a lot of folks, is it really can catch a lot of people off guard if they're not paying attention to it. This also happened, unfortunately, with my mom. My mom was a very hard-charging businesswoman. She worked for a company in Wyoming. She grew that company from a negative net loss, her division from a net loss of like $250,000 a year into almost $4 or $5 million a year in revenue. She was a hustler. She was a relationship person. She just enjoyed the hustle of the game. And for her, it really satisfied her in business. She felt very achieved and accomplished in business. And here's the challenge. When she retired, she didn't go into retirement with a plan or strategy of what she was going to do with her idle time. So here, this businesswoman, this hard charger, this person that had turned around this division in this company from a net loss to a, five-fold, tenfold, almost 20-fold success, really just didn't know what to do with herself. She would sit at home and watch people go by out the window. She was one of those people that knew everything about everything that was going on in the neighborhood where she was at. And she'd get on Facebook and she knew everything about everything that was going on with everybody outside of that. But she'd lost any type of identity or purpose. And this is a big challenge for a lot of entrepreneurs in the same way, that your identity gets wrapped up in the success you achieved in the business of what you built and who you are in that business. So much so that when the business is gone or it's absent or you've left it or you've transitioned it, you don't know what to do with yourself. That's a problem you need to get ahead of, because for my mom, it ended up costing her her life. She retired, and within 5.5 years, she passed away because of a stroke. And I think it was mostly because she didn't have any action. She didn't have anything that made her eager and excited to wake up in the morning. She hadn't planned through what she was going to do once she retired. Okay. Now, financial services, I used to help people plan for retirement all the time. We used to talk about what happens, the staging down. And, I had a lot of successful retirees tell me, man, I don't know how I ever had time to work. I feel like I'm busier in retirement than when I was working. And that's exactly what you want. That's the type of experience that you want to curate for yourself, if that's your vision, right? But I don't think most people want to retire and then be dead within a few years. Okay. So that's why it's important that you pay attention to these blind spots, and counsel with somebody that can maybe be a mirror to you, to show you these areas where you may not recognize that you have weakness, or that there's a checklist of shadows there. And if you'd like to consult with me, if you'd like this information, just reach out. Text Greybeard to 84503. It's a 5-digit number on your phone. You can tee it into your text messaging app. So 84503, like it's a new number from somebody you just met, like their phone number, only it's 5 digits. And then type my name, Greybeard. Text Greybeard to 84503. My team will be in touch. We'll ask you a few questions, and maybe we get the chance to work together. Okay, but you won't know unless you reach out. So text Greybeard to 84503. All right, so continuing on this whole theme of blind spots of successful entrepreneurs, this is kind of a checklist for you of if you have any of these shadows. Are these becoming blind spots for you? And this is the hollow hustle. Okay, this is a good one. What it means is that you're still moving, but there's no music left in it. The grind becomes automatic. You chase metrics that kind of used to thrill you, hoping they'll fill a deeper void. Achievement replaced alignment, and now your schedule's full, but your soul's empty. This is how it might show up for you. You hit big goals and feel an emotional shrug instead of a celebration. It's almost like it doesn't matter. Like there's nothing in the achievement of something new or big that gives you the same type of, adrenaline rush. You work longer hours, but avoid the question, why am I still doing this? Man, just got a little goosebumps. I think that probably resonated with some people out there, right? If you're successful, if you've been successful in business, if everyone goes, what are you doing? Why are you still doing this? That's an important question to ask yourself. What's the motivation? Is it fear? Fear of what's going to happen when you stop? Fear of dying, like I just described? Fear of being insignificant? Fear of being replaced? Fear of having no value? Fear is a liar, false evidence appearing real. So, fear is a big motivator for a lot of entrepreneurs in business. It keeps them in business longer than they should. And it erodes the quality of their success because of that. You feel tied to something that you can't leave. You can't extricate yourself from it to be more, well-rounded in your life, because you're fearful of what that means, what's going to happen when you do. Here's the truth. The hustle without heart allows you, the hustle without heart hollows you out. Purpose, not pace, is what sustains legacy. Success built on momentum without meaning always collapses inward. When your why runs dry, the grind becomes a grave. Movement without meaning is just noise. Okay? So this is an important one. If you're not doing something that makes your spirit full, that makes you feel aligned with purpose, that's a warning sign. And I've tuned myself to that. Like I said before, again, as a recovering narcissist, I don't want to make it about me. I'm just giving you this as context if you're joining the show. But I'm a Renaissance man. I like creating. I like different businesses. I was in financial services for 22 years. It almost killed me. The monotony of it, the day-to-day doldrums. It was a Groundhog's Day type thing for me. The creative in me was dying because I was in a business I didn't love, that didn't give me value anymore, that I didn't love at all. It was the weight of caring for 400 families' life savings is not a weight that escapes you. It's not something that you can just take off like a backpack that's 200 pounds. You just can't. It's with you all the time. I was tired of it. I was dead inside. I was not creating anymore. It just felt like I was absolutely stuck in a rock in a hard place. I didn't know how to get out of it. I didn't know how to continue to move in it. And, it just felt like a dead end. And that was horrible. And I stayed in that space for probably 6 months. And with my wife's encouragement and just kicking myself in my own butt, I kind of navigated bringing myself out of that, but it culminated in me deciding to sell that business. And it was a very unique business, very specialized financial services business based on the type of investments that I represented. And so I was extremely concerned about my ability to find somebody that would be able to purchase it from me or that would even want to purchase it from me. And ironically, God met me right there, showed up, and all I can say is from the point I decided to sell the business until I was completely out of it was 6 months. And the guy that ended up buying it was ironically somebody I had mentored in the business some 12 years previous. We'd become estranged and had only recently reconnected. And I'd shared with him over lunch that I was thinking about selling my business. And he says, I want to buy it. If that's not God's timing, if that's not divine intervention, I don't know what is, but it allowed me that out. But for so long, for almost 2 years, I felt stuck, absolutely burdened by what I'd created. I'd created a monster I couldn't get out from underneath, right? But then that allowed me the freedom to create other things, went right into flipping. I knew nothing about construction or flipping houses other than what I'd watched on TV, but I jumped full feet in, man. I wanted to learn. I wanted to be a student again. I wanted to be eager and excited to explore something I'd never done before. The creative in me just rejoiced that I had that opportunity. So if your hustle is hollow, if you don't get any meaning from business any longer, if it feels vacant, if it feels like the best of your years are behind you and not ahead of you, that's a warning sign. That you need to speak with somebody. You need to figure out a way out. You need to live by design. You need to live on purpose, and I can help. Okay, if you'd like to reach out, just text Greybeard to 84503. Just text Greybeard, that my name, Greybeard to 84503, and we'll be in touch. So let me talk about blind spot of successful entrepreneurs, the checklist of shadows. Let's talk about blind spot number 6. Okay. This is the armor of invulnerability. Okay. Here's what it means. You've mastered composure. You never crack, never flinch, never fold. But that armor you wear keeps love and connection out too. You believe strength is stoicism. Yet your silence is slowly starving your relationships. You've confused being unbreakable with being unreachable. Here's how it shows up for some people. You downplay pain because you think sharing it makes you weak. Your family says they can't read you anymore. You bottle emotion until it leaks as irritability or withdrawal. Man, was I susceptible to this? Did I put my family through some strain? Trying to be invulnerable, trying to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders, trying to hide from my family what was going on. So for me, I'll be very candid. This came to a head, and it was a head that I feel like, if it had continued, would have cost me my life. But this came to a head for me in 2009. You downplay pain because you think it's sharing it makes you weak, and your family says they can't read you anymore. So I had become so entrenched in my identity of being a provider that when I couldn't provide, it didn't seem like I had value or worth anymore. And I didn't share it with anybody because I felt like it was my own burden to bear. So in other words, I felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders and I didn't want to share it with anybody else. And this is one of the biggest things about mentorship and about coaching with a peer, or, as a self-improvement expert, I talk to people all the time. You need somebody in your life that's not in your everyday circle that can tell you the things that you need to hear, but that maybe you don't want to hear. Okay. For me, in 2009, for context, that was when the stock market, beginning in October of 2008, culminating in March of 2009, had lost 50% of its value. I like to say most people had 401ks that turned into 201ks, okay? And as a result of that, a lot of people did not want to invest money. Now, back then, as a financial advisor, I made revenue. I made money. My income was based on people moving money around. So everybody was kind of Chicken Little. The sky's falling. The world's coming to an end. The markets are down. The markets had lost 50%. Nobody wanted to do anything. And so my revenue dried up. And this was also the point where a lot of these adjustable rate remember stated income loans, you could go buy anything. My wife and I had bought a house. The interest rate had started to adjust up because it was a lower interest rate. It was an adjustable interest rate, which was the better strategy at that particular time. And then it started to adjust up. So my income was going down, my expenses were going up, and it was like the perfect storm. And I was facing the real prospect of individually, as a financial advisor, in the business of giving financial advice, I was faced with the real prospect that I was going to go bankrupt, that I had no way out. I couldn't make income. I couldn't turn anything into any type of revenue because people were just so scared they didn't want to do anything. Okay. And that ended up being what happened. I ended up filing for personal bankruptcy, not business, paid my employees, maintained the business, never went under on the business side, but on a personal side, we ended up having to file for bankruptcy. And for a lot of people, that would have been a very defining moment. And I'm grateful that I don't think of it that way. Like it didn't define me. I didn't let it burden me like that. Am I proud of it? No. Do I regret it? Yeah. Was there different decisions that I could have made with foresight, 2020 vision, looking back in the past, that would have changed that? Yeah. But at the time it just, even GM went bankrupt that year. So it's kind of hard to be, in a situation feeling like I was the only one. But here's the point. Because of that weight, like there were some dark times. I didn't want to be here any longer. I didn't think I had any value. I didn't think I had any worth. And so, if your worth is wrapped up in what you do or just being a provider, in other words, if you don't think that you have value outside of your ability to provide for your family, that's a warning sign. That's a red flag. That's problem number one. You need to address that. Every one of us, whether we make $1 million a year, 100,000 a year, or 50,000 a year, or 30 or 300, doesn't matter. We all have intrinsic value as humans. You were built and created for a purpose. We all have individual talents. We all have individual experiences. We all have backgrounds, etc. And all of that plays into how you can speak into other people. Look at me right now. All right. I never would have imagined, back in 2009, the year that I went bankrupt, that I would be potentially talking to thousands of people online about that experience now, being a self-improvement expert, helping people become better versions of themselves. And if it wasn't for me having those experiences, going through that process, understanding the weakness of getting into, properties over your head or investing prematurely or any of that other stuff, like I wouldn't have the wisdom I have today. I wouldn't have the life experience today. I wouldn't have people that I've mentored and coached in business. I'm coaching a couple of guys right now with companies that are worth tens of millions of dollars. I wouldn't have them, feeling the value of my perspective, my intellect, my truth to them, my mirror showing to them, if it wasn't for what I went through, and all of those experiences have made me who I am. So here's my recommendation. Don't be in a place where you stay attached to invulnerability. You got to be vulnerable. You got to share. You got to talk to somebody. Okay. Now, many of you out there, you may want to talk to your spouse, or maybe you do talk to your spouse, but a lot of you will discount what your spouse says. Your spouse has a lot of wisdom, but you'll discount it. Some of you out there may feel reticent to talk to peers because your peers think you've got everything nailed, like you're solid. You're reticent to talk to them. You can't talk to your staff because, you don't want to alert them to what you're thinking or how you're feeling or create some sort of anxiety or, challenges there. And they're your staff anyway. They're not a peer. I think the value of having, somebody like myself counsel with you is that I can relate. I've been there. I'm not a peer. I'm not somebody in your everyday life. I tend to be very frank and candid. Okay. One of my first conversations with a gentleman that I'm mentoring now that, has a business that's easily worth 20 million. One of the very first conversations I had with him, I challenged him a little bit, and he said it blew his hair back a little bit, but he liked it. I said, did you ever give consideration to the fact that the problem is you, that you're the problem in your business, that you're holding the business back because of A, B, C, and D? And he thought it was a bit audacious that I said that to him, but in reality, it was truth. And it was something that his wife had said to him as well, but he had discounted it because it had come from her. For whatever reason, it was familiar, right? And I'm not saying that as a metric of how good their relationship is. I'm just saying it's a very common experience. And I've done it myself. I've desensitized myself to the perspective of other people, and I've had to really try to level out of that. Maybe there's some wisdom. Just because my wife didn't spend 35 years in business doesn't mean she's not super smart, that she doesn't have something to say about people or situations and things like that. And likewise, for me, if you counsel with me, I'm going to shoot you straight. I'm going to give you the honest answer. I'm not going to pull any punches. You can't grow. If you're a sensitive Sally, you can't grow out of these changes. You got to have somebody confront you with the truth, right? And I'm a really good mirror that way. So, by the way, if that's hitting home for you, okay, if you'd like to counsel with somebody like myself, if you'd like to explore, working with a self-improvement expert, somebody that's a mentor, all you got to do is text Greybeard, Greybeard, as one word, Greybeard, to 84503. My team will be in touch. We'll ask you a few questions. I'm selective on who I work with because I want to make sure I can add as much value as possible. But we will explore that opportunity. I'll tell you how we work, and we'll see if we can't help you to see some of these blind spots of successful entrepreneurs. We'll go through this checklist of shadows and make sure you're not susceptible to them. But let me close out the show right now with the last one. So in terms of blind spots of successful entrepreneurs, this last one, the lone wolf lie, okay? Independence built your empire, but isolation is slowly dismantling you. You pride yourself on being self-made, but the truth is no one climbs alone forever. The blind spot tells you brotherhood is weakness, when in fact it's the backbone of longevity. Here's how this shows up, okay? You rarely share your real struggles with anyone, not even close friends. You feel disconnected in rooms full of people because you're always on. You dismiss community as distraction instead of fuel. The truth, the strongest men run in packs. Isolation may feel noble, but it robs you of wisdom, accountability, and renewal. You weren't built to carry the weight of your world solo. A lone wolf isn't free. He's starving. Brotherhood doesn't make you weaker. It keeps you human. It makes you stronger. Okay. So I prided myself on being kind of a self-made man, like in financial services, I'd literally started by calling people out of the phone book and then ended it culminating in me selling the business for low seven figures. I exited that business so I considered myself to be a self-made man, but you know what? I wasn't. It was all the experiences, all the mentorship, all the advice, all the coaching, all the discussions that I had with peers and other people. It was the good and the bad situations. It was God. God was involved in that mix. God is the source for everything for me spiritually. I can't do anything outside of him at all. He created the universe. It all comes from him, And so as a recovering narcissist, it's easy to think that you're the sole reason of success. Okay. And I've had to really consciously think about how many other people have played roles in that. I remember being a new advisor at New York Life and having my managing partner, a gentleman by the name of Tim Dickerson. I remember him speaking into me strategically, another gentleman by the name of Bob Palmer and others that really made a huge impact in my ability to stay in that business that culminated me in becoming an investment advisor representative, managing money, etc. So there's people that played a role. It's very seldom that there truly is a one-person solo lone wolf success story, okay? Super rare, right? And if you believe that, That's a weakness. It's a blind spot, because it means, so for example, what ends up happening, if you think you're the sole person that can only change things, and if the business goes sideways, if something happens, there's no one else to look at, no one else to bounce anything off of. It can be a double-edged sword. It can be something that really causes you to feel like you lost yourself. For example, I'm counseling with somebody right now that has been in business for 30 years, super successful, ran a $40 million business. And over the last few years, after COVID and some changes, that business kind of withered down to a business of 10 million or more in revenue. And this particular person, because he had really felt like he'd created it himself solely, he felt like he was the problem, right? And I said to him, listen, you didn't create this solely. You got a great team. You got almost 40 employees that are part of this business, and you just need to remember who you are. I really felt like he felt like the best years that he had to offer were behind him, not ahead of him. And I said, if you actually believed that these next 10 years, this next decade was going to be the best decade of your life, how would it change how you feel now? How would it change your decision-making now? How would it change your confidence now? Okay. And in fact, what was interesting is this particular gentleman showed me a video of himself from like 6 or 7 years ago. And in watching the video, I very specifically said to him watching the video, man, look at the swagger you had back then. That acknowledgement, that reference, look at the swagger you had back then, was the only thing he needed to go, holy cow, you're right. Look at how I move. Look how I walk. Look at the confidence I have. Look at who I was. He'd lost himself in the process. Super successful guy, made a lot of money, had a very success, and still does have a very successful business. But I needed to remind him that he's not a lone wolf, that now at this stage, at this time, he needed the counsel of someone else. It took, he'll say this, it took me speaking into him, showing him what he had lost, who he used to be, an example of that really turbocharged him now in the present moment to turn that around and to believe that the next 10 years could be the best years of his life, okay? Because he was definitely not thinking that before we had met, right? And so I hope this helps, again, I'm a self-improvement expert. We've been talking about this whole show, the blind spots of successful entrepreneurs, a checklist of shadows to kind of be aware of. Through the course of this show, we've talked about these 7 things, right? We talked about the mask of the maker. We talked about the gospel of your own genius. We've talked about the commander's curse. We talked about the prison of comfortable success, the hollow hustle, the armor of invulnerability, and the lone wolf lie, And if you'd like to counsel with somebody like myself, if you think that a self-improvement expert like myself in business can be somebody of value to you, then all you need to do is take out your smartphone, key in a 5-digit number, 84503. Text my name, Greybeard, to 84503, and my team will be in touch. We'll reach out, see if we can't connect with you, see if we can't, have a conversation with you. You'll meet me via Zoom. I can explain a little bit more about what I do and how I do it, but I would really like more than that to better understand what you're dealing with, what your situation is. And so if you're a high achieving person, successful entrepreneur, CEO, somebody trying to get there, reach out. It's very simple. All you got to do is text Greybeard to 84503. Again, Greybeard to 84503. And it's important that you do have somebody in your life that can share with you the things that you need to hear, but maybe you don't want to hear, that can show you that mirror, that can remind you of who you are, who you have the ability to become. I'm somebody that believes that I can continue to evolve. I've hustled all of my life to be a better version of myself. And I think I can help you to become a better version of yourself as well. But effectively, we won't know unless you decide to reach out, right? So here, let me one more last time. Let me encourage you. Reach out to Greybeard at 84503. Text Greybeard to 84503. And rest assured, my friends, I'm going to be back here same time, same place next week to talk more self-improvement. Greybeard out. This is The Greybeard Show.
The Greybeard Show. Learn.
Build.
Grow.